Greetings and salutations, fine gentlemen and lady listeners. The event that you are soon to audibly experience is another thrilling episode of Become the Teapot. We, your erstwhile hosts, are here to guide you on this merry adventure. My name is Mr. Iain.
And by chance, my name too is Mr. Iain. What luck!
Most fortuitous indeed, Mr. Iain. So lend us your ears as we guide you on an audio adventure by engaging in spirited discussion of media, both old and new. For this episode, as those of you with a quantum of sense may have already surmised, we will be joining the renowned League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and comparing their exploits as told in the illustrious works of Mr. Alan Moore and Mr. Kevin O'Neill with the adaptation from the far-flung year of 2003, rendered using modern moving picture technologies. So steel yourself, hardy aeronauts, and prepare to become the teapot. So, what did you think of the film?
Well, you know that I'm a fan of bad films, right?
I do, yeah. It's been well documented.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of this one.
Thank God for that.
It's a slog to get through, isn't it?
Really is, yeah. Yeah. I remember it not being a good film, but I thought, going back into it, that it would be sort of bad, campy fun.
Yeah.
But it was just bad. It was honestly terrible, generic action, awful cliche dialogue. And I'm not sure if it was because I just finished reading the comic or not, but I actually found myself getting angry watching this film. Sitting there, getting more and more worked up the longer it went on for, and just willing it to finish.
Yeah, it's a definite clock watcher.
Yeah.
I remember looking at the time a lot during this film and just thinking, there can't be much left of it. And you go, it's only 20 minutes. And it's the longest 20 minutes ever.
Yeah, because it's only, an hour and 50 minutes or something, this film, but I felt myself getting so restless throughout. It was just willing anything to happen to bring this to a conclusion, especially if it is an immediate death of all of the characters involved. I would be very happy with that. But
there is a lot of the film that I had forgotten. The only bit really that I could think of was the bit towards the end when Sawyer's trying to shoot whatever his name is.
Yeah, Moriarty.
That's it. Because spoilers, you ruined it now. You ruined this great film. Yeah,
I'm not the one who ruined it.
Yeah, I mean only because Sean Connery's character sat on his glasses or something stupid. That's the bit of the film that I know going into it, and I'm kind of glad that I forgot about it. Really.
Yeah, it's a film I've not watched in at least 15 years, probably since it came out, and I have not missed it from my life.
Well, I found it on my collection of films, which I don't know why I own it, and also it was still in its original packaging.
Oh, in the shrink.
Yeah, either I'd bought it or someone bought it for me, and I put it on my shelf, and that's where it lived for don't know how many years.
So, for those of you who don't know, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is a comic and a film based on said comic, in which Alan Moore gathers a group of literary characters and puts them on an Avengers-like superhero team full of references to all of their exploits. So we should probably address the members of the League. So let's run through them one by one and get your opinions on these characters. So first of all, Alan Quatermain from H. Rider Haggard's King Solomon's Mines and its subsequent sequels and prequels, played by Sean Connery in the film as a heroic, retired father figure. In the comics, he's a drug-addicted pugilist and big game hunter, referred to frequently as a colonizer, whose rehabilitation comes throughout the adventure. So, a bit of a difference, but what do you make of Alan Quatermain?
I mean, book and film, they are two different people. The only thing they've got in common is their name. That's about it. I mean, in the film, he's the leader.
Yeah.
He's not on the comics.
Yeah, annoyed me. He's definitely not, and we'll get to that. And it angers me more than anything else. But yes, we will get to that.
Oh, actually, you said there that he was a drug addict in the comics.
Yes.
In the film, he's not. Something that actually I did pick up pretty much straight away, because it's literally right at the start of the film.
Yes.
The first time we meet him in the film, he's just like in this old men's club kind of thing, just drinking whiskey and reading the paper.
Yeah.
But in the comic, he's found like an opium den. which, doing some research, not a lot into this film, but some, the only reason why they took that out is because Sean Connery refused to play an opium fiend.
Right.
And so the writers had to change that and go, okay, well, we'll just put you in a old man's club.
Yeah, a little old man's club for retired white hunters in Africa.
Yeah.
Isn't colonialism great? Yeah, I mean, this is, in case you don't know, this is the film so bad that it caused Sean Connery to retire from acting.
Yeah, this is his last film, isn't it?
This is his last film, but he honestly, he is quoted as saying, it was a nightmare. The experience is a great influence on me. It made me think about showbiz. I get fed up of dealing with idiots. So,
just to warn all the listeners, Sean Connery has not come back to life. That was Iain.
It's uncanny, right? Also worth noting, the director and screenwriters of this film have not made a live-action feature film since either. So perhaps there's no surprise to anyone. And
weirdly enough, Sean Connery was also an executive producer in this.
Yeah, well, I suppose that was a way of getting him more money, getting him a bit more prestige. Yeah. You know, it's a little bunce that well-established actors get. They get a little bonus and say, here you go, you can be an EP.
Well, yeah, they clearly made him the lead of the group because it was Sean Connery.
Sean Connery, yeah, no, absolutely. So let's go on to Captain Nemo and his Nautilus from Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, played by, and apologies in advance if I get this wrong, Nasiruddin Shah. Changed from being a ruthless revolutionary who shocks the rest of the league because of his willingness to gun down men with automatic weapons in the comic book, to a stereotypical wise and noble foreigner who uses swords and martial arts. So, again, a bit of a change, but what do you make of his character?
I mean, I'd say the meanings behind the character kind of the same. Yeah, like you said, they've changed a fair few bits of him, but the way he acts is kind of the same, really.
See, I would disagree with that because in the comics he is defined by a ruthlessness. It's him and Mr. Hyde standing side by side gunning people, well, Hyde killing people and him gunning them down, with Alan Quatermain and Mina stood back commenting on how vicious and ruthless it is and it's not the Victorian way. But here he is the man who someone says, draw your gun, and he says, I walk a different path, and draws a sword instead. And they give him this sort of sense of honour and nobility, which is quite often found with the sort of exotic foreigner in Hollywood films, which isn't in the comic. In the comic, he is a ruthless one. He is a pirate. He is a revolutionary. But yeah, I mean, I would say of all the characters in this, Nemo and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are probably the best in terms of page-to-screen adaptations, or closest.
I mean, considering that only the last few days I've read the comic and watched the film, I've forgotten most of the film. Until you said those bits, I was like, oh yeah, he does do that. Oh yeah, he does do that as well. So yeah, I suppose they give him more honour, really, in the film.
Yeah, he's a more heroic character, perhaps. But I think that goes for pretty much everyone in the story. Everyone seems quite sanitised from their comic book, from the opium dens to, we'll talk about the Invisible Man later, but very much him. But everyone is a lot more sanitised, including our next character, Wilhelmina Mina Murray from Bram Stoker's Dracula, played by Peter Wilson. She is a vampire in the film and very much marginalised to that role, as well as the token woman to be mooned over by half the men on the team. In the comics, she is the leader of the league and arguably the main character of the story.
Yes.
In the comics, she is ostracised from society due to her divorce. In the film, they changed that to her husband being dead because... ooh, disgusting divorced people. And
ew.
Yeah, it just, of all the changes in the film, this is the one I found myself getting angry with. Right from the beginning, when you have some random bloke, I can't remember his name, going to recruit Sean Connery is the first scene of this film, or one of the earliest scenes, rather than having it be Mina Murray as the first recruit, the leader of the team, going to recruit Alan Quatermain. Yeah. Easy change to make. But instead, they sideline her to, I think at one point she's described as a scientist, and then she's a vamp, and basically her job is to stand around looking pretty and have all of the guys flirt with her at one stage or another. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I was confused, and I forgot that she was a vampire in the film, coming off the comic as well. There's a bit in the comic that she mentions that she won't take off her scarf.
Yeah.
Obviously to hide the bites. But that's it in the 6 issues that we read. I think it goes on that she's a vampire later on. I don't know.
It doesn't. No, she's
Okay.
not a vampire.
Oh,
No.
fair enough.
She was bitten by a vampire because she's in Dracula.
Yeah.
But at no point in the story of Dracula, and this is what Alan Moore does, he takes the original stories and continues them. Mm-hmm. But at no point in Dracula was Mina Murray turned into a vampire.
No, well,
So she is a survivor of a vampire experience, but she is
I thought
not.
it was like a sort of future events in the comic that they were hinting at. But now that I know that it wasn't, I hate it even more.
Yeah. It reduces her to one role only, and I suppose they wanted to give her a superpower like the rest of them, but there are 2 people on this team who just use guns as their superpower, so it could have quite easily been that she was just the leader of the team, but
Yeah.
obviously they couldn't give that to the woman.
Next character, please.
Next character, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Dr. Henry Jekyll and Mr. Edward Hyde from Robert Louis Stevenson's Strange Case of Jekyll and Hyde, played by Jason Fleming, and, as I said before, probably the best transition of a character in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, you've gone through most of the characters that are in the book already. And yeah, I'd probably say that's probably the best of a bad bunch, really. The actions behind the character are pretty much the same. Doesn't really want to change, but he does. Yeah.
He's still hugely sanitized. You know, there's no subplot with him murdering prostitutes in Paris.
Nope.
He's not the savage beast, the murderer that we have from the original novel, but also the comic book. Instead, he's this sort of savage beast that just sort of wrecks things a bit like the Incredible Hulk. You know, I like the body horror transformations. I thought that was really cool. The gross sort of half...
Yeah, it is very, very grim. And it sort of, it pops and it does all these weird effects. And I watched it, I was like, oh, that's not pleasant.
Yeah, no, I thought that was probably the best bit of the film is those transformations, but they take up about 10 seconds. But yeah, no, I liked those whole half monster, half man, like really grotesque, one big arm, one little arm. All of that stuff was fun. But yeah, as I say, that's not enough to save anything, really. Again, a lot blander than he is in the comic because they remove any edge to him, any threat, and make him a big dumb hero.
Yeah, there you go. Hero is the perfect word for it, because there's the bit where Dr. Jekyll goes into the submarine and goes down to the floors and turns himself into Hyde to help the boat not sink, you know, and he was like, well, close the door behind me then, and he goes down and changes. So yeah, they're trying to make him more of a hero. But yeah, I think there's a sort of theme here coming that each of the characters are heroes, and I use the inverted commas there, because they're not, but they're trying to make them a lot more like, oh, this guy's the hero. No, they're the hero. It's a team of heroes. And it's like...
It's not.
Really,
I mean, it is...
like...
the comic follows all the beats of your standard superhero plot, but it's with these characters that are based on Victorian novellas and penny dreadfuls and things like that, that have extremely flawed characters in them from a modern perspective, but even from then, they're murderers and thieves and whatever else. So this attempt to make them into pure protagonists and heroes, it just doesn't ring true, which brings us on very nicely to not Hawley Griffin from H.G. Wells' Invisible Man, but instead a new character, because they couldn't get the rights to Hawley Griffin, called Rodney Skinner.
Yep.
He is played by Tony Curran as a scoundrel with a heart of gold, cockney geezer. In the comic, he is Hawley Griffin and he is a murderer and a rapist, so a bit of a difference there. What do you make of his character?
I mean, they've taken away the rape, which that's always good. I mean, they've changed it purely, as you said, they couldn't get the rights to it. It works for the film, I guess.
Yeah, he's a lot less he is... Yeah, in the comics, he is a deeply unpleasant man. He is the one character in the comic that even the other characters in the comic don't like or trust.
Yeah.
And the reader isn't meant to either. He is a real creepy motherfucker. And we're not meant to like this guy. He is disgusting. He will slit a man's throat as soon as you look at him.
Yep.
And instead we get this sort of quip-making invisible man that we get in the film. We can pardon it slightly by saying, well, it's not actually the character from the comic. It's a completely new and invented character who happens to have similar powers. But
yeah. Don't they say something like that he's not the original?
Yeah.
So that was a little wink towards we know it's not the actual guy, but hint, hint.
Yeah, that was basically their way of getting around it, is they were allowed to use the Invisible Man, but they weren't allowed to use Hawley Griffin from the Invisible Man. So, or Griffin. Hawley Griffin was a Alan Moore creation. But yeah.
Well, saying that, I'm pretty sure they don't ever say the Invisible Man. They just say he's an Invisible Man.
Yeah, no, you're probably right there. They probably were allowed to use invisibility. They said something about him being killed, the original inventor dying. So no, I don't know how the rights work. I'm not an expert on that. And like you say, I can't be bothered to investigate.
Yeah.
For this film in particular.
That's the thing. You wait till my eggs, mate.
Okay, and then speaking of not in the comics, we have Dorian Gray from Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray, played by Stuart Townsend, doing his best Laurence Llewelyn-Bowen impression.
I was scared he was going to pop out of the TV and paint my lounge. I don't know.
A complete fabrication for the film, not in the comic books. Very much inserted to be the villain.
Yeah, I mean, just going back over the characters that we just sort of spoke about, Rodney Skinner or Hawley Griffin in the comic, he's like the one you don't trust. He's the sort of evilly one.
Yeah.
They've kind of given the role to Dorian Gray for that one. Like the sort of untrustworthy, mysterious, well, maybe not mysterious, but the one that we're not supposed to trust as an audience.
Yeah, they sort of did a bait and switch in that they set up the Invisible Man to be untrustworthy and then revealed it to be Dorian Gray. But the problem is he played him so smarmy and horrible throughout the film that you didn't trust him anyway.
Yeah.
So you were like, the whole time you're thinking, well, that guy's dodgy. And then they reveal, as if it's some big surprise, that he's the traitor. And you go, okay.
What? Dun, dun, dun.
And then lastly, to make up the film version of the League, we have the token American played by Shane West, Tom Sawyer from The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and other novels by Mark Twain, and apparently the world's blandest man.
Well, yeah.
What do you think of him?
Well, I knew his name was Sawyer, and just by doing some notes, it's Tom Sawyer. And I thought, that can't be the book character Tom Sawyer.
Yeah.
And not too sure why I'm shocked to hear it, but I am. Isn't that the one that painted the fence or something, or like tricked people to paint fences?
I can't remember if that was him or Huckleberry Finn. He appeared in Huckleberry Finn.
That might be Huckleberry Finn. I don't know. But
yeah, I think from a British perspective, we don't really read Mark Twain growing up. I think it's taught in schools.
Very, very true.
In America, the way we read Shakespeare and things like that, they are taught, Mark Twain, which we don't really do over here. So unless you've gone out of your way to read it, which I haven't.
No.
I don't know about you.
No, don't be silly.
I don't know much about it apart from what I've learned usually from Simpsons episodes where they do the little stories.
Let's just put it like this. If this film was interesting, I would probably now go into the characters and do some research. I'm not going to, because the film was not interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, the character Tom Sawyer then, like you said, just a boring character. He's the sidekick. He's the, if Sean Connery's not going to stay around for the sequel, we've got old Tommy Boy here to hop in those shoes and carry on that role.
Yeah, the exciting protagonist of Man with Gun, who maybe or maybe didn't trick someone into painting fences.
Yeah, but there you go.
Yeah, no, nothing interesting to say about him. He's there as a surrogate son to Sean Connery's character, and he just bumbles around being useless the whole film until he makes one shot at the end, and we're meant to like him because of it.
Yeah.
And it just feels so much like he has been dumped in there as, hey, Americans, don't worry, it's not all about a bunch of Brits doing British things. Here's an American.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the films that Kate actually has watched with me. She just doesn't always watch them, but I kind of convinced her to watch this.
Well, why did you do that? That was a mistake.
I'm sorry. But right at the end, when they're fighting and whatever, she turns to me and goes, "So is Sawyer his son?" And I went, "No, I don't think so." Unless that's some sort of like plot twist.
It's not.
Which at this point, I wouldn't care if it was.
No, it was just about him finding a replacement for his lost son in a way.
Yeah, but I then thought of a stupid line from M being like, "Oh, you thought your son died? No, he's your son." And then me going, "All right, fair enough." Like, wow, twist ending.
No, I don't think that was that. Luckily, I mean, it's hard to think of ways they could have made the film worse, but I think that might have been one of them.
It wouldn't have surprised me if it was a stupid plot.
So those are the additional characters for the film. So let's go on to the comic book, shall we? We have a multitude of other characters from various other media in the comic books. We have Mycroft Holmes and Moriarty, who does obviously appear in the film, but both from the Sherlock Holmes novels. You've got Ishmael from Moby Dick, also appears in the film. You've got, in the comic book, Cavor from The First Men in the Moon, with his Cavorite being a main plot line in the book. You have C. Auguste Dupin from Edgar Allan Poe's detective works, and not to mention dozens of supporting characters from various Penny Dreadfuls and novellas and whatever else. So the comic is absolutely littered with them.
Yeah.
Whereas the film, not so much.
No. No. I was just trying to think. A character might have just popped into mind, but it didn't. I think this film may have killed some of my brain cells.
Jeez, you haven't got many of those to lose.
I know. I'm concerned. Yeah, the comic obviously takes place in like a alternative world or timeline.
Yeah.
And I do like that the writers, so Moore... Well, no, it was just Moore, wasn't it? He didn't have any help.
So Moore is the writer, Kevin O'Neill is the artist.
Yeah, so Moore just literally picked these characters from all these books, and he's made an interesting world, and he's made a sort of an interesting story.
Yeah.
Don't agree with everything in the book, but we'll come on to that.
We will.
But then the film, they've kind of gone, right, we're going to take this book as an inspiration, so let's use some of the characters, but then let's not use the background characters, which I think help to flesh out the story in the comic. In the film, they just go, right, here's the main 4 characters, 5 characters, and a couple more.
Yeah.
That'd be enough, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And it's only the people that they know the audience will recognise. It's only the big ones. It's not, you've got all these little obscure characters in the comic books that, half of which I don't recognise. I would have to go away and look up. I did. And yeah, I think, like you say, that really fleshes it out. And it's so much of the humour and the text that's going on in the page comes from having these established characters with backstories appearing in amusing ways, or merging together in amusing ways and coming together to form this one story. And it's not just the characters as well, but items too. As I said, Cavorite is a central plot device. The Victoria from 5 Weeks in a Balloon appears near the end, and of course numerous references throughout to emissions coming from Mars, which paves the way for volume 2 of this series. So everything that happens in this comic, there's not a page and there's barely a panel in here that doesn't include a reference to a piece of one literature or another from around this time frame, ranging from, as I said, well-known stuff like Oliver Twist, little cameo you get at the end there, to lesser-known things, Penny Dreadful characters like Broad Arrow Jack and Rosa Coote, who apparently appeared in a selection of Victorian erotica.
Ooh, saucy.
So I'm not going to pretend I know who half these people are, but I love how Alan Moore isn't afraid to include it for fear of alienating his audience. I liked going away and finding out about these obscure characters from literature, and if I hadn't have gone and looked them up, then I haven't lost anything. It doesn't harm the story to include them. There's a brief cameo, and then the plot progresses, whether you know who they are or not. But the film does away with all of that. It does away with the throwaway references to the books. Some of those for rights reasons, I'm sure. We said about Hawley Griffin, Rodney Skinner, but also they got rid of Campion Bond, James Bond's granddad. But then I'm assuming a lot of them were just removed because they didn't want to tax their audience's intelligence too much. And because, heaven forbid, not everyone understand every single reference.
Well, weirdly enough, actually, we were talking about characters in the public domain the other week back. I think it was after... This was off-air, guys. All the listeners, don't go searching for this.
Yeah.
It was off-air. So we were talking about the public domain characters.
Yeah, we were talking about Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, which actually, funnily enough, I've been going back to rewatch the Sherlock show by... completely forgot his name now. The guy who also did Doctor Who, but it's slipped my mind.
Stephen Moffat.
There you go. Thank you. Yeah, so... I do like that the characters used in this, bar a couple, are public domain characters. So it's nice to create your own story using these types of people. And yeah, like I said, he's plucked them out of various things, characters and storylines and backgrounds and all sorts of things. Even I think I saw the sort of 3-legged alien things from War of the Worlds at some point.
Yep, that's in volume 2, yeah.
So the fact that the comic is just so packed with all these things... And the film is not.
Yeah.
They've gone for like an alternative timeline because of the cars that one car that's around when the cars aren't a thing.
Yeah.
So I kind of get that, and I kind of like that in a way. But then, apart from that, if you have a look at all the panning shots, it's just, oh, that's just old-timey England. That's just old-timey France and wherever they go. The film falls flat on its face, I think, from the start, in fact.
Yeah.
The opening of the film is a weird big tank, and it just rolls over a policeman.
Yeah, and they're all hitting it with their sticks.
Yeah. That kind of sets the tone of the film and going, all right, fair enough. It's one of those films, is it?
Yeah. Whereas the first page of the comic, it shows Campion Bond lighting a cigarette, having a very short exchange with Mina. And then the second page shows a full-page spread of the construction of the Channel Tunnel with huge statues and steampunk machinery all around it. And in just 2 pages, Moore and O'Neill have managed to introduce 2 of the characters, give you a sense of their personalities, and introduce you to the world, which is different from our own, as well as foreshadowing something that would come up later with the tunnel. It's really expedient, masterful storytelling to do all of that within 2 pages.
Yeah.
And that's this whole comic there's very little narration, very few caption boxes or text boxes. It's all dialogue driven. Usually at the beginning and end of each comic there is a little blurb, a little vaudevillian barker saying something about the issue, welcome, or that sort of thing. But generally speaking, it's all done on the page. And like you say, the film just doesn't do any of that. It doesn't pack anything in. It's so attempting to ground everything within just Victorian, but look what Nemo's got. He's got a couple of gadgets. And that's it.
Yeah, I mean, the artwork in the comic is just fantastic. So far, I've not been the greatest fan of Moore's work.
We've only read V for Vendetta so far. So.
Well, yeah. But the artwork, I think, in this carried me through it. And, I mean, I like it as well because it does change, like, the way that the colours that are used and almost the types of lighting will change when they go from England to Egypt, I think it is, that they go to find Quatermain at the start, to France, wherever. So you do get a different style of where you are at the time, which I think is great. Yeah,
no, it's a stylized design. Characters are caricatures. They're bigger than they would be. Features are exaggerated. Campion Bond is fat, so he is absolutely ginormous. Things like that. But it works really well for the story we're telling because it reminds me of old pictures you used to get along that would accompany stories or old carvings. It feels like that. And then you get these big spreads of steampunk London. And then also just a street full of people. And each one of those people on the street has a different face, a different look, a different personality. And there's so much going on in those panels with these individuals that it just brings them to life.
Well, yeah, previous stuff that we've read, if you do see a crowd of people, most often than not, it's blurry and you can't see who they are, or they've kind of copy and pasted the look of them.
Yeah, they all look quite generic. It just looks like a crowd. Each person in these crowds has their own personality. I think sometimes, I know certainly the case with Century, which is the 3rd volume, he drew a lot of pop culture references into those crowds. So the idea behind Century is it jumps forward throughout the century to bring us to sort of modern period. So at various points there's a crowd full of people and you see Del Boy and Rodney in the crowd and you see all these other... Yeah, so none of that personality makes it to the screen. It all just seems very bland to me.
Yeah. Well, just talking about Moore then, wasn't this the film that made him come away from any future works of his books?
Yeah, it is. So this is the last one he is credited on. I think he's quoted as saying something along the lines of, I thought I could take the money and distance myself from the work, but it turns out you can't do that. If they slap your name on it, they put your name on the posters, so it doesn't work. So instead, after this, he said, I don't want the money, give it all to the artist, I don't care, just keep me away from it, don't put my name on it.
Yeah. I mean, when you've got the creator of the books seeing this film and then going, you know what? Yeah, I'm done. I think that sort of shows how bad the film is, or at least how bad his work is to be portrayed.
I'm not sure he actually saw the film. I think he says he hasn't, but I don't think you'd have that averse a reaction to everything after that if you hadn't have seen this. Maybe you just heard how bad it was.
Yeah, I feel like it is a very odd film. I mean, it's got some sort of styles of a very odd, old James Bond kind of film, kind of vibe to it.
Yeah, and with a bit of that post-2000s Matrix feel with some of the fight scenes and things. Yeah, that was very popular around the early 2000s.
It's very eccentric. Well, the films that come to mind when I think about this is Van Helsing.
Yeah.
And The Mummy, as in the Brendan...
Yeah, the Brendan Fraser one. I say you're doing a disservice to The Mummy there. The Mummy is a lot better than this. That is sort of rip-roaring adventure, Rocket Man or Indiana Jones style, admittedly on a sort of smaller budget. Whereas this, I'd say this very much Van Helsing. I agree with you there. The mixture of different genres and characters taken from various other works. But yeah, just none of the charm of The Mummy. None of the wit or...
I think it's got similar action and similar humour, but worse humour. Like, they are trying to do the corny one-liners, you punch a guy with a gun, you're like, one-liner.
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't write them down. That's how boring
No, well, yeah, they were rather forgettable. I would be confused, but which ones are one-liners and which is just terrible dialogue, but probably all of it.
I mean, I think they should just, rename this film The League of Extraordinary One-Liners, and then just...
I would remove the word extraordinary from any definition of this film.
The League of One-Liners.
It's just such a bland film. It's hugely forgettable, which is probably why I thought I enjoyed it more than I did, because I couldn't remember anything. When I going back to watch it, I just went, I thought this was better than it was, because I just remember, basically, the characters, and then I remember reading the comic book.
Well, I say but I didn't read the comic book, obviously.
Yeah, fair enough.
Well, I thought it was a lot more fun and more of, a swashbuckling kind of fun time.
Yeah.
Let's go get some recruits and fight some evil.
Yeah.
And you kind of watch it and you go, well, a lot's happened in the first, half an hour. It does, like you were talking about having, what was the phrase that you used last episode about the whiplash?
Oh, narrative whiplash.
Yeah. I feel that happens very early on in this film. You've got half an hour who's just cutting to different places and they go and find people and all sorts of stuff. And then it's a weird lull.
Yeah.
So after they've captured Hyde, I think, and they're going off somewhere else.
Yeah.
And they're all on the boat or on that sub just talking, just wasting time, wasting my time and wasting your time.
Yeah. No, well, there was a lot of this film where I was just willing it to end, just waiting for something to finish. Whereas I find... For me personally, the comic is a lot of fun. It's funny. It plays into the stereotypes of Victorian sensibilities and the way that they wrote stories at the time. The language, the way the characters behave, it's all very deliberately played for laughs by contrast of the fantastical things that are going on around them. Even the additional material plays up to this. All of the beginnings and ends and additional material that is included, it's all very vaudevillian, including the about the author section, which describes Alan Moore as author and former circus exhibit Alan Moore. I think it was sort of the what is it from Borneo and stuff like that. I think he says he expired from scorn. You can tell Alan Moore is having fun with this. I think this was relatively late in his career. Late 90s this was written. Yeah. He's playing with tropes of something that he is clearly very knowledgeable and very passionate about. Tongue-in-cheek references to colonialism and Victorian attitudes to the colonies, but generally it's relatively apolitical, unlike a lot of his earlier works. Yep. And there's less of an underlying sense of anger and rebellion and more lightheartedness, which, as I say, juxtaposes the darker things that occur within the story. I just think it's a real sort of romping comic book. It's the Justice League of Victorian England. It's good fun.
It's the Justice League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I did find it very hard to get into, I'll be honest. It was the artwork that kept me turning the pages, really, at the start of it. I'd say the first couple of issues, I was a little bit like, it might be the writing of Moore. Maybe not like his style as much as previous comics that we've read. But with V for Vendetta, you got the character V speaks with the use of overcomplicated wordings in English and whatever. But in this, it feels like all of the characters have got that wording.
Well, he's writing them as Victorian gentlefolk, essentially.
Yeah, it might have been that style that I wasn't a fan of, really. I'd say the last three were more interesting than the first three. So when I finally got into it, I thought, okay, well, I've got this far. May as well read it. Also, it would have been a right shame for you if I'd come on and gone, I've read the first three.
Yeah,
Didn't read
that
the
would
rest.
have been
And then you were
terrible.
like, oh, but what about that ending? I didn't read it. Yeah, I think maybe if this was the first work of Moore that I'd read, I wouldn't have gone in with that. It's Alan Moore. Be prepared.
I am right in saying you've read The Killing Joke as well.
I've not actually.
Oh, have you not? You have it, don't you?
I have it. I've watched the
Right.
animated film.
Okay.
I've not read the comic yet. It's on my list of things to do. But yeah, maybe it was the bitter taste that I had from V, because I wasn't feeling great when I did V anyway. And I came away from that thinking, okay film, less than okay comic. So maybe I was not psyched to read this.
Right. See, Alan Moore for me he's one of my favourite writers. He's one of the most critically acclaimed writers ever, in terms of comic books. I find that his characters are defined and individual. So saying that they all sort of speak in the same patois is not quite... that's not my experience with it. I find that each of these characters did, although they are all of a Victorian era and are speaking not quite exactly as they would at the time, but as a version of that, each of them I think was defined in the way that they spoke. Some of them were more clipped, some of them were more lengthy and verbose in their things. You had the repetition of Griffin, for instance, spoken very short sentences, had the the common that horrible little laugh that he would creep up with in the comic. And I think each of those things is very thought out. And if you ever see Moore's the description, the script he gives to the artists, they are so in depth. They are really written out full. I want this, and a description and a reason for everything that's happening on page. And you can see that he puts so much thought into everything he does. And I think that really comes across on the page for me. There are some unfortunate tropes that occur throughout Alan Moore's works. The use of rape as a plot line is one that occurs in pretty much everything I've read of his, which I'm not fond of. I understand it is a reality, especially a reality of this time, but it's not something I'm particularly fond of in the stories. I don't think you need to lean on that so heavily as a crutch.
Yeah.
But, generally speaking, he is, as I say, one of my favourite writers. And I think his writing turns what could be, as we've seen with the film, quite a good idea poorly executed. For instance, is taking these characters and putting them all together.
Yeah.
It's his knowledge and his writing in particular that actually turns that into something that's more interesting, that's a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more fun to read than just saying, hey, look, here's a bunch of characters on page, and then just a general shrug and a wet fart like the film.
Yeah, I mean, it took me a long time to get into the story, but the story itself, taking away the artwork, is great. It's just the way they're talking or the way that potentially interact with each other that I might just, so I might not be a fan of Alan Moore really, or at least the two works that I've read.
Because we are due to cover Watchmen very soon, and we are actually due to cover The Killing Joke as well. So I'll be interested to see, because obviously one of those is working within the DC wheelhouse, and one of them is the most critically acclaimed comic book of all time. So should be fun.
I enjoyed this more than I enjoyed V, that's what I'll say.
Yeah.
But I did come off the back of this thinking, I'm not looking forward to reading Watchmen.
Right.
If you ask me that in maybe a week's time, I might have changed my opinion because it's quite fresh, this comic. But yeah, I mean, from what you've told me on the podcast and off air, just when certain themes come up in a comic over and over again, you kind of have to stop thinking about it, going, oh, that's the character, and kind of go, well, it's the writer.
There's definitely an existing hang-up with that as a theme, and at no point does he glamorize or just purely use it as something throwaway, in my opinion, but that may vary. But it always occurs, so there's definitely something underlying there. But yes, so apart from that, I mean, was there anything else in the comic book that you didn't like?
Not really. Trying to get into it was the main thing for me, and his particular style of writing. But apart from that, no, not really. I mean, I liked the ensemble characters. They do travel around a lot, but it's not here, there, back there, back here.
Yeah.
It works for the story. When they go somewhere, it does further the plot.
Yeah, each issue feels like it's covering a certain ground.
Yeah.
Each issue goes somewhere, tells a story. Yeah, I mean, I have some concerns about the representation of the Chinese community in this, but I do think that was playing into the representation that from Penny Dreadfuls, from Victorian literature, that is what he's playing up. I don't think in any way Alan Moore is endorsing that.
Yeah, 'cause
I think it was very much playing into that. So, for instance, the Devil Doctor, who was taken, obviously, from existing literature.
Yeah, so they call him the Doctor, or the Devil Doctor. But isn't that like very, I want to say loosely based, hoping, on Fu Manchu, that kind of idea?
It was very much a Fu Manchu representation. And they replaced it with the Phantom, spelt with an F.
Yeah.
But just, again, presumably in case someone didn't get the reference. I think even Sean Connery says at some point, he's like, very operatic. And it's like, hold on a second.
Oh, the Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah, exactly. Just to hammer it in.
I get it now.
Also, I looked this up afterwards because I was pretty sure it was right. But despite the fact that the film is set in 1899 for some reason, when the comic book was 1898, advance it a year, why not? We haven't taken anything else. Who gives a shit?
Wow.
And then also, The Phantom of the Opera was written 10 years later. So, where you can tell that Alan Moore has, he's taken all these little bits, he knows what he's talking about, whereas the filmmakers have just gone, nah, that's sort of Victorian, throw it in.
Yeah, I mean...
Yeah. Another thing that annoyed me again with the film, as we said with V Vendetta, Moore is a British writer who isn't afraid to include things from a British standpoint that other people might not understand. He litters his comics with turns of phrases and references to London geography and boroughs like Shoreditch, without thinking to explain them, just throws them in. In V Vendetta's Ironborough and things like that. There's a very British sensibility to that, which is just completely absent from the film. Instead we get, oh, it's always raining in Britain jokes. It's done a million fucking times before.
Yeah.
And are so lazy, but just the shortcuts of humour in their minds.
Yeah, saying that, there was a bit, pretty sure it's in the film, pack for an English summer, and I even turned to Kate and went, wet then.
So you had the same lazy shit joke as the film.
Well, I mean, it was me and Kate watching it, and at that point, and that's even like 10 minutes in, we're just like, think he means that it's going to be a wet summer. Ha ha ha.
Yeah.
So we weren't so much, we didn't laugh at the jokes, we commented on the jokes, which is what you want from a real proper funny joke, is people commenting about it.
Yeah. Yeah, he's commenting and saying, I thought of that 10 minutes ago. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I just think that a lot of the stuff that Alan Moore exhibits in the comic book, all these little Easter eggs, if you will, are completely absent from the film. So,
shall we?
Go on then. Iain's egg hunt. Iain's egg hunt. Iain's egg hunt.
I'm not yoking you. Well, it's a good thing that you said more and Easter eggs in one sentence, because I do not have any more Easter eggs. No, because in the film, actually, about 20 minutes in, the camera pans across a building or something, and there's a poster on there including several names. So, Alan Moore.
It does.
And Kevin O'Neill.
It does. It is, in fact, it is the poster from the beginning of the book, I noticed. So right at the beginning of the book, it is the title page with all the people's names on.
Yeah.
And next to it... So you may already have this as your Easter egg. Next to it is the newspaper poster declaring the attack of the War of the Worlds.
Is indeed, yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, sorry, just to finish off that egg.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Sorry, I didn't mean to bite into your egg there.
No, that's fine. So there was Alan Moore and Kevin O'Neill was on there, along with other names, and it's people that just worked on the comic.
Well, it is, I will show you right here, this poster here, which is on the opening pages of the comic I've got here. At tremendous expense, we are proud to present Mr. Alan Moore, the world-famous Northamptonshire Nightingale. And it goes on like that for all of the editor, the artists, the letterers, the colourer, etc.
Yeah, so I just quite like that they've turned that into like an old-timey paper poster that's peeling off the wall.
Yeah.
But then just beside that, there is a poster of a front cover of a paper that says about the eruptions on Mars, and there may be some volcanoes, which is kind of like future foreshadowing, which was going to go into the sequel that never was. Yeah,
because that was also, that exact same page was also in the comic book as well. Yeah.
I'm right in saying that there's something about Mars or something in volume 2, isn't there? I don't know. I didn't read it.
Yeah, it follows the plotline of War of the Worlds in volume 2. Which is obviously set up throughout this comic book, the first volume. So that's not a spoiler to say, really.
Wow. That film didn't ever happen. I think they must have planned it and went, right, yeah, we've got an idea for a sequel. And someone walked in and went, no, that's probably it.
Well, the idea was already set up, because if you read Volume 2 of The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, it is that story, presumably, that they were planning on following, even though they didn't follow the story of this comic for this film. So,
well, talking about foreshadowing, when Quatermain and all the others first meet in that hall, dining room kind of place, library, if you will.
Yeah.
On the doors, there's the symbol for the Freemasons. And when we first meet the Phantom, that logo is on his ring, foreshadowing the Phantom's true identity.
Yeah.
Because they say that isn't that M's house or M's hall or library or something.
Yeah, it was his office, wasn't it? But yeah, again, it doesn't... I mean, it's foreshadowing, but it wasn't exactly rocket science to figure that out, was it?
But yeah, there you go. I mean, I did not care for the film enough to find out any more interesting eggs.
Yeah.
Unless you want to chuck in a couple.
Well, the comic book's got hundreds, most of which are already... Well, I say most of which. I've already listed a handful of those, but there are loads and loads and loads in the comic book, so I won't go into those now, but there are loads in there. Mm-hmm. Very good.
Well, there you go.
Right. Shall we get back to the film and the comic and wrap things up for now?
Yes, I think we shall.
Okay, so in conclusion, your thoughts on the film and the comic?
The film... Well, actually, I've got two opinions this week. I have mine, which is terrible. It's the hammiest of all the hammy acting that could possibly be hammed up and put on screen. You know, we've gone back to the world of PS1 CGI, which is terrible. And to quote Kate, as what I would like to actually do going forward is to add a very, very quick segment called Kate's Opinions.
Okay.
And this week, Kate's opinion of the film was, it was awful.
Yep.
Quote.
Good quote.
Your thoughts on the film? I mean, so far I'm sensing that you love it, so have I misunderstood that?
I mean, my conclusion, this is what I've written down. Fuck this film, read the comic.
All right.
Done. Any other business?
Hold on. So let's just go back to the comics then.
Okay.
Well, you've read this before, haven't you?
I have, yeah.
Is this the first time you've gone back to it, or have you gone back to it several times?
I think this might have been the third time I've reread it.
Okay.
Or it's the third time I've read it,
So by reading it 3 times, do you still enjoy it as much as you did the first time?
Yeah, because I think that's what it does really well, is this idea that you can reread things and pick up on little nods and little Easter eggs. And it helps that, in actual fact, by happenstance, I am listening at the moment on Audible to a collection of H.G. Wells novels. And I have just listened to Invisible Man this week, and I had previously listened to The First Men on the Moon, which I had not read before. So having that extra context for Cavorite and the lunar expedition that they talk about and things like that, having all of those extra bits of frame of reference, adds to the enjoyment of the comic book.
Yeah.
For me. So I really enjoyed rereading it. And I think that's what it does well, is lacing it with enough things that you can read it, go away and read up on some other things, and then it will add to the text rather than taking away from it. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, not my favourite comic of all time. It took me a very long while to get into it. Once I got into it and the story wrapped, I sort of looked back over it and thought, actually, that was quite good. Not as bad as I'm thinking it was. Maybe if I was to rate it, currently I'd say maybe 3 out of 5. My opinions might change, though, if I was to go back to it. Actually, the first comic of the podcast that I've read on my tablet rather than the actual book. So maybe that had something to do with it, because I quite like the feel of a book when I'm reading it.
Yeah, there's a physicality to turning a page as opposed to... and seeing it laid out in front of you as it should be, yeah.
But yeah, I'd say overall, great story, great artwork. If you're a fan of Alan Moore, pick it up. If you're not, maybe give it a chance.
Yeah. Are you planning on reading volume 2?
At this point, no.
Okay.
I wouldn't say so. I probably will.
Because I would recommend there are 4 volumes plus a couple of spin-offs, the Black Dossier and the Nemo story. But I would recommend, at the very least, reading volume 2. And in fact, probably for yourself, I think you'll bounce off some of the other material because they get a bit deeper and a bit more verbose, a bit more wordy. But I think volume 1 and 2 tell a very nice, contained, succinct story. I would recommend to most people, if they're going to read League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, that they read the first 12 issues, not the first 6, but they read volumes 1 and 2 and finish that off, because that tells the complete story as far as you need to know.
Well, let's ask the question that we ask pretty much every time. Any particular order
Yeah. Read the comic and pretend you have never heard of this film and avoid it at all costs. And if you see a copy out in the wild, destroy it immediately.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to start any riots, but yeah, please do. I mean, like me, if you've watched the film in the past or watched it recently over the last year we've had, you might have gone so insane that you've decided to put it on. If you've watched it and think, what a terrible, terrible film, I will not touch the book. Pick up the book, read the book, and then go, oh, actually, it's just a terrible film, not a terrible story or a bunch of characters.
Yeah. I mean, it's not unheard of for adaptations of pre-existing works to be terrible. So hopefully most people realise that. But yes, I would say the comic is a lot better, and it's relatively light. It's not as political as some of Alan Moore's other works. It's not as in-depth. It is a really good romp. So yeah, I would recommend it.
I think when I started to read it, I was waiting on some sort of political view to come through. I mean, maybe that's why it took me a long time to get through. Or to get into it even, thinking, oh, what's going to come up? What's he going to sort of poke at now? You know, his sort of political views of things. And it didn't happen. So actually, by the time I was halfway through, I thought, actually, no, I'm now going to sit back and enjoy it rather than expecting something from Moore that hasn't come this time.
From your experience of reading one of his comics.
Well, yeah, and talking about him as a person in our V episode.
Yeah.
He just sounds like a bit of a grumpy old man, really.
He is a bit of a grumpy old man, and he was probably a bit of a grumpy young man. I mean, he's he's a very sort of important figure within comic books, and as I say, his sort of anarchist viewpoints, his strange wizard-like ways. You know, when you see pictures of him, and he talks about his little ugly god that he found. He found a statue of a god that he decided to worship and stuff like that. He's an eccentric, and yeah, I like that about him. So, with that out of the way, any other business?
Yeah, so actually, I thought that we could talk about things that we have been up to lately.
Okay.
Well, this is a first for this podcast, but in the last week, I have read a comic that you have not told me to read.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know. It's only taken 20 episodes.
So you have devised this whole section so you can boast about that fact.
Well, I thought talk about things that we've read or watched recently.
Yeah.
Comic book or not, doesn't necessarily have to be. But yeah, like I said, I picked up a comic.
Well, hold on. Before you start, what are you calling this section?
Oh, this section is called What Have You Been Up To Lately?
Great. Yep, does what it says on the tin. Okay.
Done. No messing around.
No. Right. Well, I'll ask the question then. What have you been up to lately?
Well, thank you for asking. Not sure if you heard, but I read a comic recently.
No.
Right,
Was it the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen?
Oh, it was, you know. That's what I've been up to. Bye. No, right, I will give you the title,
okay,
and then you're going to have to work out this conundrum of a title of what it's about.
Right.
It's called The Tale of Two Time Lords.
Okay. I'm guessing it's the story of two individual, or perhaps the same, Lords of Time, and not about the Doctor getting a small furry tail and engaging in some clandestine things.
Tale as in a story, not as like...
Okay.
Tale as in tales from...
It's
Sonic.
a Doctor Who comic. I've actually got a Doctor Who comic for you here. That reminds me. I was sorting out my comics the other day. I found one in a bin. I think it's like issue 2 of a Matt Smith run. But if you... I put it aside and thought, I'll give that to Ian.
Thank you, mate. Yeah, so this one, it's the 13th Doctor, which is Jodie Whittaker.
Yep.
And the 10th, which is David Tennant, my personal favourite.
Because David Tennant sells.
Yeah, so have you ever seen... There's an episode in season 3 called Blink.
Yes.
Which they introduced the Weeping Angels, and he gets sent back in time. So he's sort of trapped in the 50s era, and then at the end of the episode, they come back and it's all fine. This fills in the gaps.
Right.
So when they're back in the 50s or the 60s, they meet up with the 13th Doctor and her current companions, which is quite a nice little tie-in of... It sort of explains what happened back then. And if you go back and watch episodes, I've not actually done it since I read, but I could feel that this would slot in very well. And it's not one of those things that when people do prequels and stuff, you go, well, hold on, you didn't explain that bit. This kind of works. Yeah. And it does feel like it feels like you're reading a script for an episode.
Right.
It flows really well.
Okay. So it's good then?
Yeah, it is good, yeah. Again, it's one I've had on my shelf for a while. 12 months or so. It's quite a new one.
Okay. Is it a single issue or was it a trade paperback?
Trade paperback. So it's, I think about 4 issues, I think.
Okay. Well, fair enough. Well, I know you're a Doctor Who fan, but is it just the comic book you wanted to speak about, or have you been up to anything else lately?
Well, something that I believe you've also been watching is the new MODOK show.
Yes.
I've only watched the first 2. 3 are currently available. I've not watched the third yet. I think it's a bit of fun.
It's quite good fun. It's very Robot Chicken.
Yeah, exactly. It's that style, that humour pushed in with the Marvel stuff, really. 20 minutes, easy, fun, quick.
Yeah, it's a good laugh. Okay, well, do you want me to do it now, or?
Sorry, one last thing that I was watching.
okay.
I remember you saying off air a while ago that you were going back over films like the Oscar films.
Yeah, the Oscar contenders, yeah.
Because it recently came out on Netflix, me and Kate watched Rocketman,
Oh, right, okay.
the Elton John film, which actually, funny enough, is an Oscar winner.
Best original song?
I think it was... I don't know, actually. I didn't make that note.
I think it was best original song for Elton John.
But yeah, it's fun, very entertaining, emotional at points.
Yeah.
It's a musical, but I would recommend it.
Yeah, no, I would recommend it as well. I think it was a lot better than Bohemian Rhapsody, the Queen biopic that they made the year before. I think it was a lot better than that. So, yeah, I'd recommend it too.
So, what have you been up to lately?
Oh, thanks for asking. Well, I went to see A Quiet Place Part 2 as a double bill feature with A Quiet Place Part 1.
Back to back.
I know, it's very exciting. And yeah, I liked it. I thought it was a lot weaker than the first part, which was a shame. I think maybe that was just watching it directly back to back, but it all just seemed a lot less frightening and less tense throughout. But yeah, it was still pretty solid survival horror film, so worth a watch.
From what I've seen of it, I've not seen the film yet, but from what I've seen of the trailers, there's a lot more talking in this one than the first one.
Yes, there is. There is.
Yeah.
There's a lot more. It's a lot less quiet, funnily enough. And it feels less like its own film. It feels more like a part 2, which I know they've put that on there, but it just feels like that. It feels sort of incomplete in a way. But, you know, it's still pretty good romp.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't watch the first one in the cinema, which I kind of wish that I had done, because people were saying that they couldn't even eat popcorn because it was so quiet in the whole thing.
Yeah.
That they were absorbed by the environment and everything.
Yeah.
And if the sequels got more talking, would you say that the audience was less enticed by the second one?
I think it helped that I went from part 1 to part 2. I didn't see part 1 in the cinema originally, and I enjoyed the film when I saw it on TV, but going back and watching it at the cinema, it is a really different experience. Having that, you know, everyone in the audience is eating popcorn and having a little bit of chitter, and within the first 5 minutes, that dies out. You know, you have this sort of standard cinema experience. Then as the film's quiet, it just becomes complete silence. And everyone, it means that anytime anyone sort of moves in their seat and it creaks, it's like, oh, I've made a noise, quick, the aliens are going to come and get me. But instead of the aliens, it's the other members of the audience who are going to beat you up. But no, and it becomes really immersive. And I thought that was really good. So yeah, by adding extra noise to the second one, a lot more noise going on, I felt that a lot of that was removed. Okay. A lot of the tense, terse nature of things was removed, but it's still pretty enjoyable. So, you know, it's a decent sequel. It's not like it's ruined the franchise or anything. It's just I didn't enjoy it as much as the first one.
Okay. You been up to anything else?
I mean, I've been up to a huge amount of things. We could be here all day. I've read a lot of comics. I am working my way through The Immortal Hulk by Al Ewing. Yep. Excellent. Speaking of body horror earlier on, a lot of body horror transformations with the Hulk, absolutely grotesque stuff in writing. A lot of big ideas there of philosophy and politics and things like that. Loads of stuff going on in a mainstream superhero comic that has been running for nearly 50 issues now, which is always a delight to see that someone can come into a character 50, 60 years after they were created and do something original with it. Yeah. Really, really good stuff. So I've been working my way through all of that, and a lot of other comics that I read on a weekly basis, X-Men, things like that. So yeah, but those are the big two.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm assuming that in 3 days' time, we will both be watching Loki, episode 1.
I will indeed, yes, absolutely. I will be finishing up an Arkham Horror the card game scenario, and then I will be watching it afterwards. So I might be slightly later in the day on Wednesday, but yes, I will be watching it.
I've not actually looked at it at all, but have we found out if 2 are coming out at the same time, or is it just 1?
I don't know, actually. I thought it was just 1, but yeah, could be 2. They've done that a couple of times now, haven't they? So
that might be a nice surprise on Wednesday to have 2 episodes. possibly even 3. I don't know.
I think, no, you're going too far now.
4?
For the whole series?
The whole season.
Well, they're releasing it on a Wednesday, which is unusual, but whatever.
Yeah.
I suppose they've got the Bad Batch coming out on Fridays, and they don't want to just drop everything on the same day. So,
on that topic, have you been watching that?
yes, I have. And MODOK comes out on the Friday as well, doesn't it? So,
yeah. I need a new show to watch that's not just 20 minutes cartoon chicken, whatever it's bloody called. And I was looking at that. It's on my list now.
I would suggest if you're going to watch it, you should watch the Clone Wars first, because it does follow on from the Clone Wars TV series. The problem with the Clone Wars is there is a lot of filler and a lot of crap in there, but there's some really good stuff as well. So if you
much like this segment,
exactly. So if you can find a decent, if you don't want to watch the whole thing of Clone Wars, if you can find a decent watch list, someone to say here are the key, I'm sure they're out there on the internet, the key episodes to watch, well worth doing. There's some really good plot lines. It's some of the best Star Wars produced in the last 20 years, so. Yeah,
because I've only watched the Star Wars films and The Mandalorian 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Within the seasons.
Yeah.
I've not watched the sort of cartoons or the CGI stuff before.
Yeah, Rebels is very good, self-contained, but it's a lot more light-hearted, but still really good. Don't bother with Resistance, the cartoon, but I would say Clone Wars is where to pick up with. And then if you enjoy it, you can watch it all. If not, you can find, as I say, watch lists, so you can just get the key episodes on there.
Cool. Okay, so I think that just about wraps up this episode.
Yeah, that was a massive divergence from the subject of today's episode right at the end.
I think what we've learned is that you shouldn't watch this film and you shouldn't watch Star Wars Resistance.
Yeah, there we go. The 2 big takeaways from today's episode. Great. Well, thank you for that, and thank you all for listening. Want to say anything?
See ya.
Cool. That's all from us. If you enjoyed The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen Volume 1, then I would definitely recommend picking up Volume 2. The further volumes can be somewhat divisive. The Black Dossier is less a conventional narrative than what we see here, and more a collection of notes, newspaper clippings, and stories about the various leagues before and after. Volume 3, Century, resumes the story of some of the characters here, but the story covers 100 years of subsequent history, bringing us right up to the modern age, and I have to admit I've not yet read Volume 4, Tempest. But rereading this has prompted me to rectify that as soon as I can. As always, you can direct your missives to becometheteapot@hotmail.com and tweet us at becometheteapod. You can also find us on YouTube, Facebook and Instagram, and don't forget to subscribe on your preferred listening platform. Next episode will be airing on the 4th of July, Independence Day to our chums across the pond. Of course, we don't celebrate that here or even know what it is, and we're forbidden from learning about it in our schools for unknown reasons. But in order to mark the occasion, we'll be watching the 3rd Captain America film as we prepare for a civil war. That's what Independence Day is about, right?
What do you want me to slag